Hi guys, as the Tories reject demands for higher pay from NHS nurses, there's a constant drip of news stories about the deep levels of corruption within Boris Johnson's government during the early days of the pandemic. People who were either Conservative members or donors or just had a connection to the party were put in a VIP lane so they could benefit from government contracts to produce things like PPE. You even had firms set up days after a so-called open tender was released, and these companies sometimes were run by just a couple of people who were handed contracts worth tens and hundreds of millions of pounds. This corruption was called out by Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner here. Have a listen.
And we've seen contracts go to people who have got links to Conservative MPs and peers, to companies, and the money that has been wasted, that hasn't been delivered. We want to see the documents now. They have to come clean on this. It is a scandal of a huge proportion, and I've been pushing urgent questions to get to the bottom of why £200 million was spent on a company that wasn't even registered when the Tory peer approached ministers to get that contract.
Can you appreciate, though, that if we rewind a little bit and go back to the middle of that crisis, that at that point, we were in a global pandemic. There was an urgency, wasn't there, to find suppliers as fast as possible. On this programme every day, we were talking about a lack of PPE and complaining that people weren't able to get hold of it. Can you appreciate that there perhaps wasn't time at that point for the government to put all the checks in place?
Well, here's why.
Now, before Angela responds to this, there's something else that needs to be added. There was an exercise called Operation or Exercise Cygnus, which was supposed to prepare the government for a pandemic. And it released its report and it was ignored. The government were told, you have PPE that needs to be replaced, you have PPE that is out of date, you have PPE that is not fit for purpose, and it needs to be replaced. And it was ignored. And that's very important to remember. And when it comes to PPE, other countries, developed countries, didn't have this problem. There were shortages, but there wasn't corruption involved here. So this is specifically a Tory problem. Okay, yes, at the beginning of the pandemic, many countries were struggling. But there was no aim of handing out contracts to people who were connected to political parties. So this is specifically, once again, a Tory problem.
I'm even more frustrated because many companies that were delivering on PPE and had a track record were not able to deliver and were not able to get through to the government because they had this VIP fast track lane that gave people a leg up. The companies that weren't even formed, this company in particular, was formed 5 days after they'd approached ministers to get a contract, wasn't in the field before, and it's scandalous that during a pandemic, when people needed that support, it looks like deals were done and that there wasn't a due process and there wasn't any sort of diligence whatsoever when other companies that could have delivered on that contract were not even able to get a look in. And some of that £200 million, 81 million of it, was for masks that were being delivered by the same company for less than half the price of what this company was delivering for the government. So there is real questions about probity, around due diligence and around the billions of pounds that has been wasted. And today we are still spending every single day £700,000 on PPE storage that cannot be used as a result of some of these contracts.
Completely correct. And there's also PPE that is being destroyed at the moment because it can't be used. And where are the individuals who set up these companies? Where is the money gone? Now, as Angela Rayner pointed out here, there were a number of companies that were actually offering to do work. And I covered this at the beginning of the pandemic back 2 years ago. This is one example. Telford company with PPE supplier ignored by government. This was on the 21st of April 2020. Telford-based battery makers ASON Group is disappointed it has not heard from government officials, despite telling them their supplier in China can provide PPE within days. The government said it had received 8,000 supplier offers, and it is prioritizing larger volumes. And of course, later we discover the priority was for these companies who had connections to the Conservative Party. There was another story, another firm, this is according to the BBC, it comes as another firm based in Birmingham told the Daily Telegraph that they felt it had been left with no choice but to send its PPE to Europe, as it said government ministers failed to respond to its emails. And I remember, seeing a video with a guy who was interviewed who was producing PPE in his factory. In the video, you could see the PPE being produced in the factory. And he was asked, where is this PPE going? And he said, to the United States. Because he reached out to the government. He told them, look, we can produce the PPE for you. And he did not receive a reply. Why did he not receive a reply? Probably because he was not on this VIP lane. He hadn't donated to the Conservative Party. He wasn't a Tory peer. Pure and utter corruption. And at a time when the Tories are telling nurses, sorry, you need to take a pay cut, a real terms pay cut, because we don't have the money, or because we can't afford it, or it's going to cause inflation. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.